There is a queue, there is a long queue of projects that I am trying to make, videos that I'm trying to create, and then I also have deadlines for work. So the last thing that I should be doing is starting a new project. So that's what I'm gonna do.
A distracting thought had entered my little brain. A question, really. Can I recreate this dress? This is the Ultimate Muse Pearl Dress by Odd Muse. Apparently this dress has gone viral on the app that must not be named. Though some people have no qualms and absolutely adore the dress, others, though they had some lovely things to say about it, the look, the quality, they were also saddened by the fact that upon donning it, they could not raise their arms very high at all, and one more common complaint was that the dress doesn't seem to fit bigger busted body types very well. So the question was not simply, can I recreate this dress, but rather, is there a way I can recreate it while making it more comfortable and possibly flattering to bigger bosoms? The first thing to do was acquire supplies. Nothing was to be found at the thrift store. Well, I wouldn't say nothing. But nothing in the way of what was needed for this particular project, except maybe these. But I was fairly certain I already had some pearls somewhere. So I ventured onto the second option, Walmart. Specifically the clearance aisle, because the fabric section is basically no more. Well, not precisely no more, but it's been steadily dwindling for months now, and a lot of notions have been clearanced, and to my dismay on the clearance aisle there were yet more notions on clearance. So the sewing aisle might indeed become a thing of the past very soon. But to my delight, there were a plethora of bed sheets on clearance. A little expensive, but hey, to find 100% cotton sateen, that was pretty amazing. Well, I should clarify, not expensive had I been purchasing bed sheets for the actual use of bed sheets that were going to last me the next 10 years. Then it would be a good and practical investment. But in terms of purchasing it to make a dress that I really don't need and likely won't be able to wear much, yes, expensive and irresponsible. You gotta be foolhardy once in a while. I made my selection and was ready to run off with it when I noticed something. There was a subtle difference in hues which the fluorescent lights had almost concealed from me.
Oh shoot, this one is cream and this one is white. Oh no, is the dress cream or white?
Doused in doubt and indecision, I quickly referred to the website photo and was assured that it was indeed white. I placed the cream back on the shelf, feeling a little sad for leaving it behind, but I'm sure it went to a good home. Only one reckless purchase should be made in a day after all. I returned home with the hope of immediately setting to work, but the suggestion of a sore throat that had been brewing since that morning was now full-fledged pharyngitis, and steps had to be taken to combat said evil. And while that was cooking on the stovetop, I felt an intense urge to accomplish everything on my list. Somehow I thought I could do it all in one afternoon. The delirium had apparently already set in. I determined to start fresh the next day, and to spare my throat, I simply wouldn't talk to the camera anymore. I would just explain it all in voiceover later. But when the next morning arrived, I realized I did not want to try working on this project at all. I had plummeted into, for real, sickness. Well, look at that. 3 minutes in, and we're just now getting to the construction of the dress. Yikes. I noticed similarities to a dress I had made a couple years ago and decided to utilize that pattern as a starting point to hopefully speed up this very delayed project. I gave it a try on to see how it fit and how I should go about altering the pattern pieces. A few adjustments needed to occur, and I accomplished those by cutting some pieces out of a thrifted tablecloth. Now, I decided to make some modifications to the original design, so if you were hoping to see something closer to what the original Muse dress pattern would look like, that side front piece would actually look a lot more like this side front piece from my Chelkieeee dress recreation, but more on that later. I stitched the pieces together, tried it on, made a few more adjustments, and I had a new pattern, which I actually documented onto paper. So official. Well, almost. For that back piece with the dart, I wanted to divide it into 2 pieces, so a little woodle-loodle-loodle, and it was 2 pieces, and I had a fully documented paper pattern. If you do not know what woodle-loodle-loodle is, I am so sorry. Then it was time to prep the sheets. Unpicking all the stitching can be tedious, and I know many people prefer to forego this process, but I prefer to go it. And I had good company. After that, I tossed the sheets in the washer and then the dryer. And the next day was not great. It was a do a little bit, lie down, do a little bit, lie down kind of day. But I also had good company for that. 2 days later, I was back at it. For the dress lining, I used some remnants remaining from a bedsheet that I had used for a previous project. The stitching lines were fairly extreme, but they wouldn't be a problem at all since they would be on the inside, and I do love to use as much fabric as I possibly can before letting it go. Okay, here's what the pattern pieces looked like, and here we come to some of the modifications I made from the original design. This is not what the original dress design pattern pieces probably looked like. They probably looked a little bit more like this. Basically, a strapless dress with some armhole dips for the sleeves to go into. Very similar to the pattern pieces for lots of the Chelkieeee dresses. I did recreate one. If you want to see what that pattern looks like, take a glance at this video. I decided to go ahead and include shoulders to attach the sleeve to because this might be part of the reason a lot of people were having issues with not being able to raise their arms much. In the original design, the sleeve had to serve as both sleeves and shoulder pieces, and I think that possibly lent to some discomfort and limited mobility. I would like to say that I think the original design is very cool, very inventive. To me, the neckline seems rather reminiscent of dresses from the Tudor period, and I think that's really cool. I love it when I see designs possibly drawn from historical costume. However, I am not always thrilled to sacrifice my comfort for a cool design. Sometimes, but not always. So I included the shoulder pieces. That's what the pieces look like for my rendition, but this is probably much more accurate to the original design. I set to work cutting out the interlining, which was yet more remnants of thrifted bedsheets from previous projects. I really don't throw anything away. And the outer fabric. I cut out 4 layers of everything in total because this dress bodice needed to be thick and sturdy. Quick sidebar here, I would like to clarify that interlining and flatlining are actually different. The terms are often used interchangeably in the sewing world, so it can get confusing. There are discrepancies as to what is actually correct. Some will tell you there is a specific definition. For me, this is a personal preference. I do recognize the difference, and while I do usually appreciate using correct terminology, I don't like using the term flatlining, since the same term means something different in medical terminology, and it is uncomfortable for me. I think it's okay to do what you're comfortable with, but be willing to convey that information to your fellows so that communication doesn't break down and everyone winds up confused, which is precisely why I'm mentioning it. Communication is key to healthy relationships. Thank you for your time and consideration. And back to the dress. I usually prefer to hand stitch the layers together when I do this method, but you can also do it on the machine. I don't always like to add fusible interfacing to bodices, but there are some occasions where I think it is helpful, and like I said, this thing needed to be sturdy. So I added some lightweight fusible interfacing to the outer fabric bodice, inside of it. On the wrong side of the fabric, not the right side. I finished up the edges and then stitched all of the bodice pieces together, bodice lining and bodice outer fabric, making 2 separate bodices, which would eventually be joined together to become one. And then I decided to stop procrastinating from actual paid work with a looming deadline. Once that responsibility was out of the way, I could jump back into fun sewing.
Here it is. This is the lining. It is definitely too high. I have to bring that down quite a bit. And this is actually a little too far over. I need to take that up. I wanted to have room to work with it. I didn't want to make it too low or too far over here. So I gave it a little extra. And what I'll probably end up doing is just taking a really big seam allowance here and here. But the nice thing is that I have this space to work with, so I can go ahead and sew that seam a little bit, try it on. If I need to take it up a little more, I can.
I wanted to show the difference between the sleeves and what the sleeve pattern probably looked like in the original design versus my version, and how one might go about sewing that.
So the bodice looks really silly right now because it's just safety pinned together, and then I also tucked the straps in so that you could see what it would look like as the original design. So this little swoop here, you would just take the sleeve and this little section right here gets attached right in there. And there's also a dart that you would insert right at the top to shape it to the shoulder. So then you would just sew part of the sleeve in here into the underarm piece, and then right where it stops, you would just turn that edge under and stitch it down. And there's your sleeve. And this would get eased a little bit as well so that I wouldn't have to keep holding it up. It would get eased a little bit so that it would be a little bit tighter and stay in place. So that's what it would look like with the original design. Very cool sleeve design. It simply limits the range of motion. All right, onto a sleeve that is slightly different and will hopefully offer a little bit more motion.
For reference, here is the original design sleeve sitting on top of the sleeve that I used. There is a subtle difference. The cap height is just a bit taller for the original design. I cut some lining for the sleeves from the bedsheet remnants, and the outer sleeves out of that beautiful cotton sateen sheet. So 4 sleeves in total, 2 lining, 2 outer fabric. Because this bodice was definitely going to have to serve as support and outer garments, I determined that 4 layers of fabric and a layer of fusible interfacing wasn't quite enough, so I added some plastic boning to the lining, so as not to have stitching on the outside of the bodice. This is actually how I used to insert my boning, that or using a much more complicated method because I used to be adamantly opposed to top stitching. I've really grown in that area as a person, though. The sleeves were just a tad long, so I trimmed them, and yet again contemplated bangs, a little bit of starch, and I joined the lining and the outer fabric to make a single sleeve. Time to figure out the skirt. Measure the bottom of the bodice back and the bottom of the bodice front. Whatever number you end up with for the back, add 4 inches, and to the front, add 8 inches. These extra 4 inches will be folded into pleats. And then for all of the edges, be sure to add seam allowances, except for the center back because that seam allowance was already included. I cut out 3 layers for the skirt because this also needed to be thick. If you do happen to create a similar dress, you won't have to do all this layering if you're able to locate a thicker fabric. The fabric that I was able to find was fairly thin. The original dress is made from a polyester spandex and rayon blend with a nylon and spandex lining, and both were probably way thicker than the cotton I was able to find, but I really don't mind since I much prefer working with and wearing cotton. I had my width by measuring the bodice. For the length, I simply measured from my waist to where I wanted the hem to end and added about 3 inches. I cut out the front on the fold and 2 pieces for the back, and that was what they looked like. I put all 3 layers together, making certain to press and pin very well to prevent bubbles. Once they were all happily nestled together with their thread bindings, I stitched the skirt back pieces together up to a point, leaving about 9 inches open. And then I set the skirt front atop the back and joined them together at the sides. I turned the skirt under 3 inches for a heavy hem to weigh it down, and then used a lovely thrift store discovery to accomplish an invisible hem. Attaching the skirt to the bodice was as simple as matching up seams and edges, pinching the pleats, and squishing them flat. I stitched the skirt to the bodice, inserted the zipper, and neatly finished the inside with some hand stitching. I really should have tried it on first before all that hand stitching though, because after a try on, I determined that I hated the way the pleats in the back were laying, so I took it all out, moved the pleats over a smidge, and I was happier with that. I had to reattach the zipper and stitch the inside of the bodice back together, but it looked so much better to me. Then it was time for the final step. I did locate my pearls and was worried that I wouldn't have enough, and I knew stitching each pearl on one by one was going to be immensely tedious, but I just went for it. And went for it. And more beads. Through all those layers of fabric. I continued sewing on beads for the remainder of the day, taking breaks here and there, but near the end of it, I was in a Louise Walker sort of mood.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa!
But I persevered, and filmed the attaching of the final pearl as a symbol of my perseverance. So perfectly, just out of frame. But I had enough pearls and even some to spare. But that was it. Holy smokes, the dress was complete. That took a little longer to sink in than I would like to admit, but it was indeed complete. I must say that I was pleasantly surprised at how much I liked the fit of this bodice, but then again, I really do love wearing stays, and this has a similar feel, but I know this might not be comfortable to everyone. And while I do love wearing stays, I'm not in love with a pleated skirt. Also, with such a short skirt, there would be no safe way of bending down, and I tend to be rather mobile. I do need a dress that I can move in and sit down in a less than ladylike fashion. I tend to find myself more comfortable in something that follows the natural curves of my body without attempting to shape them a little bit differently, and a swishy skirt, like this dress. I do love a good swishy skirt. This bodice does follow the natural curves instead of squishing or squeezing the body into a slightly different shape. There's nothing wrong with either style. The only question to ask is what you feel more comfortable wearing. Some things aren't going to fit you or be comfortable to you quite the same as another person, whether it be a dress, a word, or a mode of living. I say go with what you are comfortable in. And sometimes you won't know what that is until you try it out, of course. So try it out. Set out to discover what is best for you. I was almost finished editing this video and it came to my attention that the founder of Muse recently did come forward and say that there had been a sizing issue with some of the dresses. So maybe it wasn't only different body types not being flattered by this particular style, but also correct sizing may have been a factor. I just wanted to mention that. And yes, I realize there's probably a question you want to ask. I will tell you. Yes, this is my natural eye color.